You think tonight was the first time I intervened?
You don't even know my name.
Madeline. Table 7. Black coffee, no sugar.
The clink of baccarat crystal abruptly ceased. The string quartet's bows froze mid-stroke. In the grand hall, 100 of New York's most powerful elites completely stopped breathing. The man standing in the archway didn't shout. He didn't have to. "Get away from her," the Mafia Boss said quietly. The Morgan Library and Museum was suffocatingly warm, despite the crisp October air outside. The private charity gala, heavily populated by Wall Street titans, legacy politicians, and old money heiresses, was supposed to be a triumph for Madeline Foster. At 28, she was Sotheby's youngest and most brilliant senior authenticator of Renaissance antiquities. She was also, undeniably and unapologetically, a size 22. In a sea of rail-thin socialites, draped in clinging Tom Ford and backless Saint Laurent, Madeline stood out. She wore a custom-made, deep sapphire velvet gown that hugged her heavy curves, her thick mahogany hair pinned up in an intricate twist. She knew she looked beautiful. She also knew exactly how the elites in this room saw her. An outsider, a brilliant workhorse they could use, but never truly one of them. She was used to the subtle sneers, the backhanded compliments about her brave fashion choices, and the way men's eyes skipped over her in search of smaller, more fragile prey. She didn't care. She was here for the art. Specifically, a recovered 15th century Florentine ledger that she had personally authenticated after it spent 70 years missing. "Come on, Maddie. Don't be difficult. It's unflattering." Madeline suppressed a weary sigh and turned away from the glass display case. Standing uncomfortably close to her was Chad Harrington. Chad was a senior vice president at a ruthless hedge fund, the kind of man who wore a $50,000 Patek Philippe watch to compensate for his absolute lack of a personality. He had been hounding her all evening. "For the last time, Chad, I cannot disclose the reserve price of the ledger before the auction," Madeline said, keeping her voice even and professional. "It's a breach of my contract, a breach of ethics and, frankly, illegal." Chad took a step closer, invading her personal space. The smell of his expensive scotch and overpowering Tom Ford cologne made Madeline's stomach churn. "Ethics," he scoffed, flashing a veneer-perfect smile that didn't reach his cold, predatory eyes. "You think anyone in this room cares about ethics? My client wants that ledger. He wants to know the number so he can sweep it off the board before the public bidding starts. And you are going to tell me." "I am going to get a glass of champagne," Madeline corrected, stepping sideways to bypass him. Chad shifted, blocking her path. His eyes raked over her body, his expression twisting into a patronizing sneer. "You know, Madeline, you're in a precarious position. Sotheby's keeps you around because you've got a good eye. But look at you." He gestured vaguely at her figure. "You don't exactly fit into this world. You take up a little too much space. People talk. A big girl like you needs powerful friends to stay afloat in Manhattan. I can be a very good friend. Or I can make sure your career tanks by Monday morning." Madeline's jaw tightened. She had fought tooth and nail for her position, battling sexism, classism, and relentless fat phobia every step of the way. She wasn't about to let a mediocre finance bro intimidate her. "My career," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous chill, "is built on my intellect, which is vastly superior to yours. Now move out of my way before I call security." Chad's face flushed an ugly, mottled red. His fragile ego shattered in an instant. He wasn't used to being told no, and he certainly wasn't used to being dismissed by a woman he considered beneath his notice. "You insolent fat cow," he hissed, the polite veneer completely dissolving. He reached out and grabbed her upper arm. His fingers dug painfully into the soft flesh of her bicep, his grip bruising and tight. Madeline gasped, more in shock than pain. In all her years navigating high society, no one had ever laid hands on her in a crowded room. "Let go of me," she demanded, trying to yank her arm back. Chad held on tighter, yanking her toward him, knocking her clutch to the marble floor with a sharp clatter. "You think you're so smart? You're nothing. I'll ruin you," he spat, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the surrounding guests. Whispers broke out. The polite murmurs of the gala began to die down as the nearby socialites and businessmen turned to watch the spectacle. No one stepped in. They simply watched with morbid, detached curiosity as Chad Harrington physically manhandled the Sotheby's authenticator. Madeline felt a hot flush of humiliation and rage prickle behind her eyes. She planted her feet, using her weight and her low center of gravity to yank her arm backwards with all her strength. The sudden movement caused Chad to stumble, his hand slipping from her arm, but not before his elbow slammed into a passing waiter's tray. A crystal flute of Dom Perignon shattered against the marble floor. The sharp crack echoed through the massive vaulted room. The music faltered. The conversation stopped. Chad, humiliated by his stumble, turned back to Madeline with eyes full of pure malice. He raised his hand, balling it into a fist, stepping toward her. "You stupid bitch!" The temperature in the Morgan library seemed to plummet 20 degrees. "Get away from her." The voice wasn't loud. It didn't boom over the speakers or echo off the ceiling. It was spoken at a conversational volume, yet it sliced through the dead silence of the room like a straight razor. It carried a heavy, terrifying weight, a chilling promise of absolute violence. Chad froze, his fist still half raised. The crowd of 100 elites parted instantly, desperately scrambling over each other to create a wide path. They didn't just move, they recoiled, as if a live bomb had just rolled into the center of the room. Walking down the newly formed aisle was Dominic Moretti. Madeline's breath hitched in her throat. To the FBI, Dominic Moretti was a ghost, a myth they couldn't pin a single RICO charge on. To the underworld, he was the undisputed king of the eastern seaboard, the head of a syndicate that controlled everything from the shipping ports of New Jersey to the concrete poured into every skyscraper in Manhattan. He was ruthless, calculating, and possessed a legendary temper that he kept locked behind eyes the color of dark, turbulent oceans. He was 34, standing 6'3", dressed in a flawless, midnight blue Brioni suit that did nothing to hide the broad, heavily muscled build of a man who had fought his way up from the streets of Palermo. And he was looking directly at Chad Harrington, like Chad was already a corpse. Chad lowered his hand, his arrogant flush draining away to a sickly, chalky white. "Mr. Moretti," he stammered, his voice trembling violently. I didn't realize you were in attendance tonight. This woman was just being uncooperative. I was trying to—" Dominic didn't even look at Chad. He didn't acknowledge the man's existence. He simply walked past the trembling hedge fund manager and stopped right in front of Madeline. The terrifying cold mask on Dominic's face fractured, softening instantly as his gaze swept over her. His eyes dropped to her bare arm, where bright red finger marks were rapidly blossoming into ugly purple bruises against her pale skin. A muscle feathered in Dominic's jaw. The silence in the room stretched so tight it felt like it would snap and sever everyone's heads. "Madeline," Dominic said, his voice a low, rough rumble meant only for her. "Did he hurt you?" A collective silent gasp rippled through the room. The absolute shock radiating from the 100 guests was palpable. Dominic Moretti, the untouchable, lethal mafia boss, didn't attend charity galas. He certainly didn't know the names of Sotheby's appraisers, and he definitely didn't look at them with the kind of dark, consuming devotion currently burning in his eyes. Madeline stared up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one in this room knew their secret. No one knew about the quiet, secluded dinners in the back rooms of old-school Brooklyn trattorias. No one knew about the rare, first-edition books that mysteriously arrived at her tiny apartment. No one knew that for the past 6 months, the most dangerous man in America had been gently, relentlessly, and obsessively courting her. She had tried to push him away. She had told him they were from different worlds. She had told him she was too soft, too normal, too heavy to be on the arm of a man who looked like him. Dominic had simply kissed her hand, looked her dead in the eye, and told her she was the only real thing in a world of plastic, and he worshipped every inch of her. "I'm fine, Dominic," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. Dominic's jaw clenched tighter. He slowly lifted a gloved hand and gently, almost reverently, brushed a stray curl of mahogany hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed her cheek. Then he turned around to face Chad Harrington. The softness vanished. The devil returned. Chad actually took a step backward, his expensive dress shoes squeaking on the marble. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Mr. Moretti, please. I swear to God it was a misunderstanding. She bumped into me." Dominic took one slow step forward. The room held its breath. "You put your hands on my woman," Dominic stated. It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence delivered in a monotone. "My woman." The words echoed in the cavernous hall. Madeline felt a jolt go through her spine. He had just claimed her. In front of the governor, the mayor, the heads of 5 major banks, and 100 of the city's worst gossips, Dominic Moretti had drawn a line in the sand, with her standing behind him. No, I didn't know," Chad pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. He looked around wildly for help, but the other guests physically turned their bodies away, cutting all ties. Chad was infected. He was marked. "I didn't know she was with you. She's not your usual type. I didn't think—" Chad stopped, realizing exactly what he had just said. Dominic's eyes went completely dead. He didn't yell. He didn't pull a weapon. He merely tilted his head, looking at Chad like one looks at a cockroach before bringing down the heel of a boot. "My usual type," Dominic repeated softly. He reached into his jacket pocket. Half the room flinched, but Dominic only pulled out a sleek, black smartphone. He dialed a single number, put the phone to his ear, and kept his dead eyes fixed on Chad. "Vincenzo," Dominic said into the phone. "Chad Harrington, Goldman Sachs. Liquidate everything. Buy his debts. Call in his margins. Take his townhouse. Take his cars. I want him entirely erased by midnight." Chad let out a strangled, pathetic noise, his knees buckling. "Please, Dominic, please, you can't do this." "And Vincenzo," Dominic added, his voice dropping an octave. "Send a car to the Morgan Library. Have a few of the boys wait for Mr. Harrington outside. He and I are going to have a conversation about how to speak to a queen." Dominic hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He turned his back on the sobbing, ruined man, dismissing him entirely. He held his arm out to Madeline. "Shall we go, Mia Regina?" Dominic asked softly, offering her a slight, devastating smile. "I believe your work here is done." Madeline looked at the trembling, silent crowd, then at the man who had just burned a titan of industry to the ground simply because he bruised her arm. She placed her trembling hand in the crook of Dominic's solid arm. "Yes," Madeline said, holding her head high. "Take me home." The heavy doors of the Morgan Library and Museum closed behind them, sealing away the panicked whispers of New York's elite. Outside, the crisp October wind whipped down Madison Avenue, but Madeline felt entirely insulated from the cold. A sleek, armored Mercedes-Maybach S680 Pullman idled at the curb. The chauffeur, a mountain of a man in a sharply tailored black suit, opened the rear door with a respectful bow of his head. Dominic guided Madeline inside with a gentle hand at the small of her back, his touch a stark contrast to the violence he had just promised the room. The partition between the front and rear seats slid up smoothly, enclosing them in a silent, leather-scented cocoon. The Maybach pulled away, blending instantly into the Manhattan traffic. Dominic didn't speak immediately. He reached into a concealed compartment, withdrawing a silk handkerchief and a silver ice flask. He wrapped a handful of ice cubes in the silk and gently pressed it against the angry, darkening bruises on Madeline's upper arm. Madeline hissed slightly at the sting of the cold, but the throbbing ache almost instantly dulled. "I should have killed him in the middle of the room," Dominic murmured. His voice was a low, terrifying rasp, his dark eyes fixed on the purple marks marring her pale skin. "I should have let Vincenzo snap his neck on the marble." "You did enough," Madeline said, her voice steadier than she felt. She looked at the man beside her, the terrifying enforcer of the East Coast underworld, currently treating her arm as if it were a fragile piece of porcelain. "You ruined his life in 60 seconds. The physical violence would have just brought the NYPD down on Sotheby's." Dominic's jaw twitched. "The NYPD works for me, Gatina. But you are right. A public execution is untidy." He lifted his gaze from her arm to her eyes. "You held your own. You didn't back down when he threatened you." "I'm a size 22 woman in the high-stakes art world, Dominic," she said, a bitter, proud smile touching her lips. "If I backed down every time a mediocre man in a Tom Ford suit tried to intimidate me, I'd still be fetching coffee in the basement archives." Dominic's eyes darkened with raw, unfiltered heat. He reached out, his large, calloused hand sliding to cup her jaw. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. "You are magnificent," he breathed. "Every curve, every inch of your brilliant mind. You are the only masterpiece in that entire building." Madeline's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But the sharp, analytical part of her brain, the part that had made her Sotheby's youngest senior authenticator, suddenly clicked into gear. She thought about Chad Harrington's desperate, out-of-character aggression. Chad was a Wall Street parasite. He wasn't a street thug. "Dominic," Madeline started, pulling back just slightly. Chad wasn't just acting out of bruised ego. He said his client wanted that ledger swept off the board before public bidding. Hedge fund managers don't risk felony assault charges over 15th century Florentine tax records unless there is something much bigger at play. Dominic sighed, leaning back against the plush leather. The dangerous, calculating mob boss returned to his eyes. "You are too smart for your own good, Madeline. Tell me." "The ledger isn't just a historical artifact," Dominic explained, his tone strictly business. It's a palimpsest. Madeline gasped. A palimpsest. In the antiquities world, it meant a manuscript page where the original text had been scraped off to make room for another. But often the older writing could be revealed under specialized light. But I authenticated it myself, Madeline protested. It's genuine iron gall ink on 15th century vellum. The vellum is real. The top layer of ink is real, Dominic agreed. But beneath the original Florentine accounts, modern invisible UV ink was applied precisely over the historical lettering. It's an old smuggler's trick, updated for the 21st century. That ledger contains the offshore banking routing numbers and cryptocurrency keys for Declan O'Connor. Madeline's blood ran cold. Declan O'Connor was the ruthless head of the Irish syndicate, operating out of Hell's Kitchen and Boston. He was Dominic's most volatile rival. O'Connor has been bleeding money, trying to hide his assets from a joint FBI and Interpol task force, Dominic continued. He used an art restorer in Geneva to encode his entire financial empire into that ledger. He planned to buy it through a proxy, Chad Harrington's shell company, legitimately bringing the codes back onto US soil under the guise of an art acquisition. And because Sotheby's publicized my authentication of it, Declan knew exactly where it was, Madeline realized, horror dawning on her. Chad was desperate because O'Connor threatened to gut him if he didn't secure the ledger before the auction, Dominic said. He pulled his encrypted phone from his pocket as it vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Vincenzo has Harrington, and Harrington is singing like a canary. The Maybach bypassed Dominic's usual Tribeca haunts and pulled into the subterranean, hyper-secure garage of 15 Central Park West. Surrounded by 3 armed guards, Dominic escorted Madeline up the private elevator to his penthouse. The apartment was breathtaking, a sprawling expanse of dark mahogany, imported Italian marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the glittering New York skyline. But Madeline barely noticed the luxury. Her mind was racing, piecing together the historical ciphers. "I need my iPad," Madeline demanded the moment the elevator doors opened. "I have the high-resolution, multi-spectral scans of the ledger on Sotheby's secure cloud." Dominic signaled to one of his men, who quickly handed Madeline her device from her retrieved clutch. She kicked off her painful Louboutin heels, sinking into a massive cream-colored leather sofa. Dominic sat beside her, watching her work. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched the fierce concentration on her face with absolute adoration. Madeline pulled up the scans. She applied digital filters, mimicking the ultraviolet light she used in the lab. Slowly, the glowing, modern text ghosted onto the screen beneath the ancient Italian script. "It's not a straight translation," Madeline muttered, her eyes darting across the screen. O'Connor's restorer was clever. He used a Visionaire cipher, keyed to the original Florentine dates in the margins. A Visionaire cipher uses a keyword to shift the alphabet. If you don't know the keyword, it's virtually unbreakable. But the restorer made a fatal flaw. He matched the shifts to the 1492 banking entries of the Medici family. Madeline's fingers flew across the digital keyboard. She was in her element. Weight, society's judgment, the terrifying underworld she was sitting in, none of it mattered. She was a savant, decoding a puzzle. Within 20 minutes, she had broken the first page. She created a quick reference table on her screen and showed it to Dominic. Decoded ledger entries, page 1. Florentine keyword. Cipher text, UV layer. Decoded intelligence target, asset. Firenze, XHQPZWMRY. Account number 4992-Cayman O'Connor. Shipping, Medici, LTV, BNOQA, a Swiss key, 7781B, Boston Real Estate, Florin, RRSYUI, PLK, Crypto Wallet, 0x9. A arms, shipments. Dominic stared at this table, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He looked from the screen to Madeline, his eyes blazing with a mixture of shock and profound respect. "Do you understand what you've just done?" Dominic asked quietly. "I broke the cipher," Madeline said, adjusting her dress over her thick thighs, suddenly hyper-aware of his intense gaze. "You just handed me the keys to Declan O'Connor's entire empire," Dominic corrected, his voice thick with emotion. "The FBI has spent 5 years and $50 million trying to find these accounts. You did it in 20 minutes from my sofa." Before Madeline could process the compliment, the heavy oak doors to the penthouse living room swung open. Vincenzo, Dominic's heavily scarred underboss, strode in. He looked grim. "Boss," Vincenzo said, nodding respectfully to Madeline before addressing Dominic. "O'Connor knows Harrington failed. He just sent a heavily armed crew to Sotheby's to smash the vault and take the ledger by force. The NYPD is 10 minutes away, but it's going to be a bloodbath." Madeline gasped. "The night guards! My colleagues are still there doing the inventory." Dominic stood up, the air around him instantly turning lethal. "Stand down the men at Sotheby's," he ordered Vincenzo. Vincenzo blinked. "Boss, if O'Connor gets the ledger is completely useless to him now," Dominic stated, turning his encrypted phone toward Vincenzo. He had already forwarded Madeline's decoded table to his syndicate's financial hackers. "Drain the Cayman accounts. Liquidate the Boston real estate shell companies. Burn the cryptocurrency wallets to dead addresses. Do it all in the next 3 minutes." Vincenzo's eyes widened as he read the screen. A vicious grin split his scarred face. "Consider him bankrupt, boss." "Then," Dominic continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority, "call O'Connor's burner phone. Tell him to pull his men out of Sotheby's immediately, or the next file I decode will be sent directly to the director of the FBI." "Yes, boss." Vincenzo bowed his head, throwing one last reverent look at Madeline before hurrying out of the room. Silence descended on the penthouse once again. The crisis had been averted. Hundreds of millions of dollars had just changed hands, and a mafia war had been won, all without a single gunshot being fired. Madeline sat frozen on the sofa, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline finally crashed. She had just actively participated in taking down a crime syndicate. Dominic walked slowly back to the sofa. He didn't sit beside her this time. Instead, he dropped to his knees on the plush Persian rug right in front of her. "Dominic, what are you doing?" she whispered, her eyes wide. He reached out, placing his large, warm hands on her thick thighs, grounding her. He looked up at her, his dark eyes entirely stripped of their ruthless armor. He looked at her not just as a woman he desired, but as a queen who had just won him a kingdom. "For 6 months, you have told me that you don't belong in my world," Dominic said softly, his thumbs tracing soothing circles on her legs through the velvet of her dress. "You told me you were too soft. You told me the people in this city would only ever see you as the heavy girl who evaluates their art." He leaned forward, pressing a tender, searing kiss to the bruise on her arm. "Tonight, you proved exactly who you are, Madeline," Dominic murmured, his voice thick with raw devotion. "You are brilliant, you are fearless, and you are the most dangerous, beautiful creature I have ever met." Madeline felt hot tears prick her eyes. For her entire life, she had been made to feel like she was too much, taking up too much space, too heavy, too opinionated. Yet here, kneeling at her feet, was a man who owned the city, telling her she was exactly right. "I'm terrified, Dominic," she admitted, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Dominic reached up, catching the tear with his thumb. He stood, pulling her gently up with him. He wrapped his massive arms around her, crushing her soft, full curves against his hard, heavily muscled chest. Madeline buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of his expensive cologne and the underlying metallic tang of cold night air. "Never of me," Dominic vowed, his lips pressing into her mahogany hair. "Let the rest of the world tremble, Mia Regina. From now on, anyone who ever looks at you with anything less than absolute worship will answer to me." Madeline closed her eyes, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist. As the city lights of Manhattan glittered coldly through the penthouse windows, she finally let go of the heavy armor she had worn her entire life. She was safe, she was seen, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. And just like that, the woman society tried to make invisible became the most powerful queen in the underworld. Did you love seeing Madeline embrace her brilliance and Dominic burn down the city for her? If this mafia romance had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button, share this video with your book besties, and subscribe for more thrilling, pulse-pounding stories. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite twist? See you in the next one.